Hello, welcome to Lesson 8.1B. I've entitled this video, Compromise of 1850 and Uncle Tom's Cabin. This video is going to cover pages 482 to 487. California reignites the slavery debate. For a time after the Missouri Compromise, both slave and free states entered the Union peacefully. However, when California requested admission to the Union as a free state in 1850, the balance of power in the Senate was once again threatened. Conflict and compromise. In 1849, there were 15 slave states and 15 free states. Admitting California as a free state would upset the balance. Moreover, it seemed possible that Oregon, Utah, and New Mexico might also join the Union as free states. Many Southerners feared that the South would be hopelessly outvoted in the Senate. Some even suggested that Southern states might want to secede or remove themselves from the United States. Northern congressmen, meanwhile, argued that California should enter the Union as a free state because most of the territory lay north of the Missouri Compromise line. It was clear that the nation faced a crisis. So question number 1, in 1849, what was the balance between the number of free states and the number of slave states? It was equal at 15 free and 15 slave. Number 2, why were Southerners upset when California wanted to be admitted as a state in 1849? They were afraid because it was going to enter as a free state, thus upsetting the balance of power. Number 3, the vocabulary word secede. This is going to be a big one over the next several topics. Secede means to remove or break away from the country you belong to. So seceding states would be leaving the country. Question 4. When the California crisis emerged, what did some Southerners suggest their states should do? They suggested that they should secede. Conflicts between Henry Clay and John C. Calhoun. And there he is again. Henry Clay had won the nickname the Great Compromiser for working out the Missouri Compromise and the Compromise Tariff of 1833, which resolved the nullification crisis. Now, decades later, the 73-year-old Clay was frail and ill. Still, he pleaded for the North and South to reach an agreement. If they failed to do so, Clay warned, the nation could break apart. Senator John C. Calhoun of South Carolina had worked with Clay to pass the Compromise Tariff of 1833, but now he opposed compromise over the extension of slavery to the West. He drafted a speech expressing his opposition. Calhoun was dying of tuberculosis and could not speak loudly enough to address the Senate. He stared defiantly at his northern foes while Senator James Mason of Virginia read his speech. So question number 5. What nickname had Henry Clay received for the many compromises he had achieved in his lifetime? He was called the Great Compromiser. Question 6. Which South Carolina senator opposed Henry Clay and compromised over the extension of slavery in the West? That was Senator John C. Calhoun of South Carolina. Calhoun insisted that slavery should be allowed in the Western territories. In addition, he demanded that fugitives, or African Americans who had fled slavery, be returned to their owners. He wanted Northerners to admit that slaveholders had the right to reclaim their, quote, property. Calhoun's demands were based on his belief in states' rights. He believed the federal government's power over the states was limited. As Calhoun saw it, states had chosen to give authority to the federal government. Therefore, he believed states had the right to decide how much authority to give, and they could cancel the agreement if they wished. If the North rejected the South's demands, Calhoun told the Senate, "Let the states agree to part in peace. If you are unwilling that we should part in peace, tell us so, and we shall know what to do." Everyone knew what Calhoun meant. If an agreement could not be reached, the South would use force to leave the Union. Question number 7. Define fugitives. Fugitives were African American slaves who had fled slavery. Question number 8. What demands did Senator Calhoun propose at this time? Number 1, he wanted all the fugitives that had fled to the North be returned to the Southern owners. And secondly, he wanted Northerners to admit that slaveholders had the right to reclaim their fugitive slaves, their, quote, property, as he called it. Question 9. What were Senator John C. Calhoun's views on states' rights? He was a strong believer in states' rights. He believed that the federal government's power over the states was limited, and he believed that the states had voluntarily given the federal government the power, therefore they could decide how much power to give the federal government. And they could cancel that agreement if they wanted to. Question 10, what threat to the Senate did Calhoun give? He said, hey, if you don't want to see things our way, let us know and we'll leave. We'll leave this country in peace. And if you won't let us leave in peace, well, then we'll fight to leave. He was threatening civil war. Daniel Webster offers compromise. Daniel Webster of Massachusetts spoke next. He had opposed Clay's compromise tariff of 1833. Now he supported Clay's plea to save the Union. Webster stated his position clearly. Primary source, Daniel Webster, speech in the U.S. Senate, July 17, 1850. I speak today not as a Massachusetts man, nor as a Northern man, but as an American. I speak today for the preservation of the Union. There can be no such thing as a peaceable secession. Webster opposed the concept of states' rights. He believed that in a union, the federal authority was supreme. He feared that the states could not separate without suffering a bloody civil war. A civil war is a war between people of the same country. Like many Northerners, Webster viewed slavery as evil. The breakup of the United States, however, he believed was worse. To save the Union, Webster was willing to compromise. He would support Southern demands that Northerners be forced to return fugitives from slavery. Question number 11. What was the main point of the speech that Northern Senator Webster gave about his demands? He said, no, we can compromise, but what we can't have is for you to peacefully leave the country. It won't happen. It can't happen. If you leave, it'll be bloody. It'll be bad. We can't have a civil war, and we can't have you seceding. So he was saying, I believe in keeping the country together more than I believe in you us basically getting rid of slavery. So can't have that. Got to keep the country together. Number 12, what is a civil war? A civil war is a war between people of the same country. Question 13, what were Senator Webster's views on slavery and secession? Senator Webster, like many Northerners at the time, viewed slavery as evil. However, he believed that the secession of the Southern states would be worse than slavery. A compromise holds the Union together. In 1850, as the debate raged, both Calhoun and President Taylor died. The new president was Millard Fillmore. Unlike Taylor, he encouraged Clay to seek a compromise. The Compromise of 1850 addresses regional concerns. Henry Clay gave more than 70 speeches in favor of a compromise. At last, Clay proposed the Compromise of 1850. By then, however, he had become too sick to continue. Stephen Douglas of Illinois, woohoo, took up the fight for him and guided Clay's plan through Congress. So as you look at the picture here, this is a picture of the little giant, Stephen Douglas. He did Clay's work for him because Clay was exhausted from the work he'd been doing on the Compromise of 1850. And also Clay was suffering from tuberculosis, so he left the Senate to recover. Question number 14. Which two deaths helped the country come to a compromise in 1850? The deaths of John C. Calhoun, that fierce Southern senator from South Carolina, and President Taylor. Question 15. Which Illinois senator helped push Henry Clay's Compromise of 1850 through the Senate? Stephen Douglas. The Compromise of 1850 had 5 main provisions. 1. It allowed California to enter the Union as a free state. There would be 16 free states and 15 slave states. 2. It divided the rest of the Mexican cession into the territories of New Mexico and Utah. Voters in each state would decide the slavery question by popular sovereignty. 3. It ended the slave trade in Washington, D.C., the nation's capital. Congress, however, declared that it had no right to ban the slave trade between slave states. 4. It included a strict fugitive slave law, and that would be the one that would cause a lot of tension. 5. It settled a border dispute between Texas and New Mexico. So for question 16, the 5 provisions of the Compromise of 1850. Number 1, it allowed California to enter as a free state. 2, it divided the Mexican cession into New Mexico and Utah, and the voters there would decide slavery through popular sovereignty. 3, it ended the slave trade in D.C. 4, it included a fugitive slave law that was very strict. And 5, it settled the border dispute between Texas and New Mexico. The Fugitive Slave Act helps the South. The Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 replaced the Fugitive Slave Act of 1793, which slave owners believed was too weak. Under the 1793 law, many Northerners had refused to cooperate with slave owners who were trying to capture escapees and return them to slavery. The new law required all citizens to help catch African Americans trying to escape slavery. People who let fugitives escape could be fined $1,000 and jailed. And $1,000 is a lot of money today, but it was even more money back then. The Fugitive Slave Act also set up special courts to handle the cases of runaways. Suspects were not allowed a jury trial. Judges received $10 for sending an accused runaway to slavery, but only $5 for setting someone free. Lured by the extra money, some judges sent African Americans to the South whether or not they were runaways. So question number 17, what were the important parts of the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850? Well, number 1, it said that all citizens had to help catch runaway slaves. And 2, it said if you didn't, your punishment could be being fined $1,000 and or being jailed. Oh my. And also, the Fugitive Slave Act had special courts to help handle the cases of runaway slaves, and it paid twice as much money if a judge said you were a runaway than if you were not and set you free. So some were lured by the double the money for saying that someone was an accused runaway. Northern anger over the Fugitive Slave Act. The Compromise of 1850 had the effect of holding the Union together for a while longer. However, the conflict between the North and the South over the issue of slavery and its expansion remained. Many in the North and in the South were not satisfied with the compromise. Anti-slavery Northerners were particularly angry about the Fugitive Slave Act. By forcing them to catch runaways, the law made Northerners part of the slave system. Northerners found it harder to believe that slavery was a Southern problem that they could ignore. In several Northern cities, crowds protested by trying to rescue fugitives from their captors. To counter the Fugitive Slave Act, many Northern states passed personal liberty laws. These laws made it harder to recapture those accused of running away. The laws brought suspects before judges, provided jury trials, and prohibited kidnapping. Some laws also gave legal assistance. One state, Vermont, declared free any enslaved person who entered the state. Southerners were outraged by these laws and called any interference with the Fugitive Slave Act unconstitutional. Question 18. Why were many Northerners angry about the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850? Well, before the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850, while Northerners may not have liked slavery, it was not knocking at their door. It wasn't intruding into their lives. Now with the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850, they were being told, you are part of this slave system. You have to return slaves or face jail and or a fine. And that made them feel like this is a violation of my personal rights and I don't like slavery to begin with. Question 19. What were some measures that Northern states took to fight back against the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850? Well, many states passed personal liberty laws that made it harder to recapture those accused of running away. It also gave these suspects jury trials, and it didn't allow kidnapping. And then some states in the North also gave legal assistance. For example, Vermont said any slave that came to their state would be free. Oh my, you could feel the tension rising. A book sways the North against slavery. In 1852, Harriet Beecher Stowe of New England published a novel called Uncle Tom's Cabin. The novel showed the evils of slavery and the injustice of the Fugitive Slave Act. A powerful story appeals to Northerners. Stowe told the story of Uncle Tom, an enslaved African American known for his kindness and piety. Tom's world is shattered when he is bought by the brutal Simon Legree. When Tom refuses to reveal the whereabouts of two runaways, Legree whips him to death. The novel quickly became a bestseller. The first printing of 5,000 copies sold out in 2 days. Within a year, 300,000 copies were sold. Eventually, the book sold millions of copies and was translated into dozens of languages. Question 20. What novel was published by Harriet Beecher Stowe in 1852 that further outraged the country? Uncle Tom's Cabin. Question 21. Why did Uncle Tom's Cabin make Northerners angry? Well, they read the story of Simon Legree whipping Uncle Tom to death, and he was a very sympathetic character, and they saw the cruel injustices of slavery. But first, let's go into some details about Uncle Tom's Cabin. Uncle Tom's Cabin was published in 1852. Harriet Beecher Stowe was an abolitionist who wrote the book in response to the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850. Uncle Tom is the main character, who is a slave. He is eventually sold to a cruel master, Simon Legree. Legree beats Uncle Tom viciously. Finally, near the end of the novel, Uncle Tom refuses to tell Legree where some runaway slaves have gone. Legree orders his overseers to kill Uncle Tom, which they do. Uncle Tom's Cabin sold 300,000 copies in its first year. Uncle Tom's Cabin was the best-selling novel of the 19th century. Uncle Tom's Cabin was the second best-selling book of the 19th century. Of course, the best-selling book, the Bible. It has been said that when Abraham Lincoln met Stowe at the start of the Civil War, he stated, "So, this is the little lady who made this big war." Uncle Tom's Cabin made Northerners mad at the cruelty of the slavery system. And then we can answer question number 22. Uncle Tom's Cabin made Southerners mad at what they felt was an inaccurate portrayal of what the slavery system was actually like. They felt like it was a grossly exaggerated portrayal of slavery. We don't actually do that to our slaves. You are making wild stories up, Harriet Beecher Stowe. How dare you make these lies? So both sides were angered by Uncle Tom's Cabin. Nationwide reaction is mixed. Although Uncle Tom's Cabin was popular in the North, Southerners objected to it. They claimed that it did not give a true picture of slave life and did not show the good side of slavery. Yeah, right. Indeed, Stowe had seen little of slavery firsthand. Despite such objections, Uncle Tom's Cabin helped change the way Northerners felt about slavery. No longer could they ignore slavery as a political problem for Congress to settle. More and more Northerners now saw slavery as a moral problem facing every American. For this reason, Uncle Tom's Cabin was one of the most important books in American history. And as the picture shows, Uncle Tom's Cabin further divided our country over the issue of slavery. Well, thank you very much for watching. Before we go, I have another meme about compromise. Compromise. She wanted a puppy, but I didn't want a puppy. So we compromised and got a puppy. Thank you and have a nice day.